This Hangout on Air is live. That's what it says. And so far, I'm live too. This is Gardner Campbell. I'm Vice Provost for Learning Innovation and Student Success at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I'm also an Associate Professor of English and privileged to be this summer one of 6 instructors for a special digital engagement pilot of UNIV 200. It's a course at the sophomore level, typically, on research writing, but it has the much more interesting title of Inquiry and the Craft of Argument. And the particular craft that we are focusing on in this special digital engagement pilot is not only the craft of argument or even the craft of inquiry, it's the craft of dreaming as well, which is why our alternate title, Living the Dreams, Digital Investigation and Unfettered Minds, is such an important part of the work we're trying to do. We really do want to be able not only to help students understand and use the craft of academic argument and inquiry, but to begin to expand those boundaries as well, boundaries of investigation, boundaries of time and space that the online world has a funny way of playing with, and hopefully at times expanding too. And also the bounds of creative expression, the bounds of what constitutes an argument. Is it just words, or is it, as Kathleen Blake Yancey once argued, not with words only? So what I'm going to be doing here in just a minute is welcoming Ted Nelson into the Google Hangout. I have sent him, since it's never simple with the Google Hangout, but that's okay. Ease of use is possibly overrated as a computer experience. I have sent him the URL to join the Hangout, and we should be hearing from him at some point in the next couple of moments as he is able to join us.
Hello?
Dad, are you there?
I've been here for the last 15 minutes. I've been trying to get connected.
I think we are connected.
I sent you several questions. I signed on. I sent you an email. Now I guess I'm connected.
You are indeed connected, and thank you so much for being here today. It's always the devil's in the details. I think maybe we've got the devil on the run now.
The original quote is, "God is in the details," by the way.
Well, what happened?
It was just one of those Manichaean things. It flipped state.
That's right. Well, that's all above, I mean, I have to say Olympus is above my pay grade, but it's probably a good thing for humanity itself. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start the ball rolling by reading you a sentence from Computerlib Dream Machines, actually 2 sentences, or 1 sentence, I guess, and asking you to respond to that because it's going to figure directly into the work we're doing in our course this summer. And I know that we've got a lot of students who are dying to hear your response to this, whether you still think this is true. So you've got this in a section that's called CAI, that's Computer-Aided Instruction, General Wrongfulness, which is one of your great subject headings.
one of my general attitude.
There you go. And you write, and this is 1974, computers offer us the first real chance to let the human mind grow to its full potential as it cannot within the stifling and insulting setting of existing school systems. Do you think that potential is still there? And what do you make of the current state of those school systems?
Well, the point is, what ruins education is the structure of schools. That you see, when people talk about, quote, education, what they mean is supporting the existing school system. And that is exactly what's wrong. The existing school system, with its system of curricula, of gradation, of stamping out, attempting to stamping out homogenized minds, and at the same time reducing knowledge to a system of a small number of testable points, greatly reduces the human potential and the human spirit. And I don't understand quite how this can ever be fixed within our educational system.
Did you hope at one point that the sheer transformative potential of computers, wisely designed, might be the thing that could turn the tide?
Yes. And wisely designed and giving freedom to the student. But of course they haven't given freedom to the student. They've simply tightened the manacles and created tighter curricula, which in some areas is a good thing because people need to know specific stuff, but in terms of enlightening the mind, enlightening the spirit is a very bad thing in general.
So you saw in 1974, as you published this book, and of course earlier in the work that you were already doing, that there was a particular moment of urgency and possibility.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you say now that you think that moment is past, or would you say there's a way to recapture that? And if so, how do we do that?
I am so pessimistic, I hardly want to express it. But yeah, I don't see any way. I see everything going in the opposite direction. Excuse me, I just dropped my pen, and I'll have to get by without it. If you could hand me that calendar from the hook. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, what we now have is a proliferation of online academies and schools that want to take government loans, and at the same time hook you into the latest fads of quote IT and so forth and so on, meaning train you in Microsoft or whatever. But at the same time, we see we see humanistic education, we see vocabulary dropping spectacularly. I haven't seen any actual statistics, but I have the impression that young people today have half the vocabulary we had 50 years ago. Thanks very much.
And when you think about this, and you think about the way in which many of the warnings that you were issuing at that moment in 1974 have proven not only prophetic, but have come true in the bad sense, have you given up on computers altogether? Do you think there is any point of interest?
All the time, and I'm still trying to build the system I've been trying to build for 50 years. I believe you said you were going to have the students look at my latest delivery of the Open Xanadu.
Yes, we have sent that link out and asked students to take a look at it. The progress has continued. It took you 50 years, but it is coming true. How?
But it's kind of too late.
But do you think that there are principles there that you've been working on for a long time, admittedly, but that are now visible in this new way?
Well, certainly. What I'm trying to do, and what I've made my principal priority in my life, rather than what I wanted to be doing, which was making movies, my principal priority has been to create a document structure that I consider decent for the human race, and despite ridicule and misunderstanding. And at least we're one step down the pike now in terms of having a deliverable. And I don't know how much further I'll get. I don't know how long I'll live, you know. So, but at the same time, I don't have anybody to pass the vision on to, because it's very hard to be a visionary, because it means having the vision and also mapping it to the available structures, which is extremely difficult. And I compare myself. I've always compared myself to Frank Lloyd Wright in the sense of trying to create things that other people could not imagine, and detail them so that they had the qualities that I imagined, as distinct from a cruddy detailing, which doesn't give the whole picture.
And when you speak about documents, you're not talking just about print documents. You're talking about any kind of symbolic representation.
Sorry. To me, a document is any media package. So a movie is a document, and a hypermovie is a document, and all the kinds of documents I imagine which combine all the different media will be documents, but at present we can't show them.
And you agree with McLuhan that the nature of the medium is not detachable from the content that's being expressed. Is that right?
The nature of the medium is indeed the pool in which you're swimming. McLuhan had extraordinary insights about media, and yet I should tell you that when I had lunch with him and tried to explain about hypertext, he was absolutely, he didn't get it, whatever. He went off on a completely misunderstanding speech about how computers could not vary their operation in any way. Essentially not getting it to 3 decimal places.
So he did not understand that a computer as a universal machine was a simulation laboratory for potentially anything. He was simply
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
he thought of computer code as the antithesis of the flexibility he sought in mediated expression.
Exactly so. And so I tried to tell him that the computer would make possible new media and new structures that were barely imaginable, which we do not have in my view, and he didn't get it. But his insight that the medium itself contains much of what is being transmitted, this was powerful. But on the other hand, the difference between, say, Hitler's speeches and Orson Welles's War of the Worlds and the radio kid shows I used to listen to as a boy gives you a very wide range within that medium.
Seems very strange that someone who was primarily famous for his study of television and other kinds of electronic mediation could not then make the leap to understanding the computer as a meta-medium. And I found that that's a hard thing to explain to people. How do you breach that barrier and not say it's just a TV set, it's just a typewriter, it's a universal machine, it's a meta-medium?
I don't know. And today I find that the kids are coming out of high school not learning to program. 20 years ago, they came out of high school having taken programming courses. Something has gone seriously wrong. Now they use their iPads, and I hear kids say, nobody invented the internet. Or that Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet, which is worse. So that nobody now understands where we're in. When I was a kid, I knew who had invented radio, or rather I knew who everybody thought had invented radio. Actually, Tesla's patents were upheld. But I knew who had invented the movie, except he hadn't. But the point was that there at least was a history behind these things that now is missing. Everybody thinks the world of today suddenly appeared from the brow of Zeus, and we should just all love it, as distinct from considering how it ought to be better.
Do you think that part of the issue is that computers are new in a new way?
They're not new in any new way. They're old now. And essentially the iPad has made the computer disappear to most people.
I see. So we're now in a world of appliances. We're not even in the world of computing anymore.
Nobody knows it. Nobody knows that we are. And so the first thing, I taught a course last fall, and I was knocked sideways by finding out that the students did not know what computers were. And these were like second year, third year, fourth year honor students, and that completely disoriented me. Meant I had to start the course over.
And what did you do when you started over?
Frank, my colleague Doug Deco gave them a brief lesson, a month's lesson in Python language, which was very helpful.
And that did make a difference?
It did. It did indeed.
So let's talk about your own education. One of the things I'm always curious about is how people survive their education. And what was it in your own experience, either positive or negative, that essentially liberated your mind into being able to imagine things in this way?
Well, first of all, basically I was homeschooled. I was raised in an extremely literate family. I was raised by my grandparents and my great-grandparents, all of whom were born in the 19th century, which is why I speak 19th century English. And there was much talk, a lot of it for my benefit, around the dinner table of history and literature and art. And I got a very big vocabulary early, and I had difficulty with other kids because they seemed to me so ignorant. But at the same time, I would say I got a full education at home, and so school was merely an irritation, and which I did not like at all. I fell in love with all the girls one at a time, but at the same time, and I liked my teachers. It was the setting. It was the oppressive setting I didn't like, and so I essentially received a you would say an undergraduate education by the time I was 10, just hanging around with my grandparents. My great-grandfather was a science teacher, and he taught me about astronomy and bits of physics. Although I hated algebra, that's the one thing I loved in high school that I didn't learn at home, which was physics, high school physics. And I was shocked and disappointed in college when I couldn't learn calculus, and so had to leave the sciences behind. I hated mathematics. Or rather, I hated what I thought were mathematics. This is another of those stereotypes we live in. You see, everybody thinks mathematics is about numbers. Wrong. Mathematics is about imaginary objects with rules. Mathematics is a crystalline universe of structures and relations. Some of those structures and relations involve numbers. But topology, graph theory, group theory, category theory are not numerical and could indeed be taught without numbers. And the fact that they are hidden, that no one has access to so-called higher mathematics until they've had to go through all the damned algebras and 2 years of calculus, means that all these things are hidden from the public. It's an outrage.
Have you, do you know the book Douglas Hofstadter's Fluid Concepts and Creative Analogies? He talks about the same kind of thing. It's essentially pattern recognition and the ability to bracket series to make implicit patterns become visible in unexpected ways.
Bracket series. Are you talking about series of numbers?
Yes. So
then it's numbers. Yeah, I hate numbers.
Oh, okay. But it could work for anything. It could work.
Well, yeah. Okay.
And basically, I guess in a way, a fantic field, if we look at your idea about something that is maximally expressive along every possible dimension, affective, conceptual. I hope I'm stating.
Is that my definition? That's amazing.
Well, that is my paraphrase of your definition. I can find it. It's.
I haven't used those terms in years because nobody was interested in them at the time.
Well, I can tell you when I got to the place where in full caps you say responsive computer display systems can, should, and will restructure and light up the mental life of mankind, I certainly.
I think that's true. They did that to a certain extent, but with too short a distance.
Well, and your emphasis seemed to be, and you tell me if I've got this right, that we think about the possibilities for the complex and rich portrayal of ideas in very impoverished ways. We have all these resources available to us that strike out across the entire expressive range of our human capabilities, and we use a vanishingly small amount of them.
Yep. Well, that's true. And that's partly true because it's up to teachers in classrooms to deliver this stuff, and they are so overworked and so boggled with appalling administrative crap, and they have to work within the curriculum, so they have a very narrow presentational realm. And also these packages, they can't buy the packages that are available, so they could use free packages. But once again, that's extending beyond the allowed curricula, as I understand it.
And when you were thinking about this, doing this work, you were also living at a time when there seemed to be a little more bandwidth for experimentation. There seemed to be a critical mass of people, partly because of certain historical events, who seemed interested in exploring alternatives. Were you?
I don't know anything about that.
You don't? Oh.
I didn't meet any of them. Or pardon me. I had a couple of friends who did video art that I didn't like.
Okay.
But I did not meet anybody else doing interesting things except when I looked them up.
Were you aware of the mother of all demos?
Oh, sure. Well, I had visited Doug 2 years before that, so I had seen all of that part. I'd seen a goodly part of it in his lab. And felt thoroughly, I felt attuned to him to a certain degree, except that he thought hierarchically.
I see.
And that was always our sticking point. In recent years we became very close, but unfortunately we were so busy with other things that there was no time to discuss real issues till he was dead.
And how did you become aware of his work? How was that conversation started?
I'm not sure, but I arranged for it. When my boss at Harcourt Brace, I was with a publisher at the time, when my boss Bill Jovanovich wanted to go out to the Bay Area, I said, and meet Richard Atkinson, the CAI guy, whom I disliked intensely. I said, let's also visit Doug Engelbart. So I knew about him from writings in '66.
He was someone also, I think, who felt that it was very difficult to get people to see the bigger picture he was trying to sketch out. Did you ever?
He did everything he could. He held encounter groups. He brought in Werner Erhard. He had his people take LSD. It made a very bad impression on the rest of the company, but it did indeed create a very cohesive group that worked for him at the time. They did fall apart later. I wasn't there, so I can't criticize his leadership except to say that people did get progressively turned off by A, the complexity of of his interfaces, and B, the strangeness of his organization. But I wasn't there.
But as he emphasized those root causes and the particular practices of EST or mind-expanding drugs aside for a moment, he was a systems thinker who was trying to get at certain basic ideas of human
Absolutely.
capacity.
His notion was of sharing ideas, of deep collaboration. And so he explored many possibilities, and the NLS system, which has never been duplicated, although you have, various .com startups that are doing parts of it. The NLS system stands majestically alone for all the things you could do with it. Although, as I said, it was hierarchical.
And behind it was also this idea that we've taken as a catchphrase for our course, thought vectors in concept space. Yeah. And when you and I talked about this the other day, you said you had some thoughts about that as well, that it also, there's an intertwingling, let's say, that's implicit in that.
Well, let's put it this way. The topic is so big, and I haven't had a chance really to give any orientational remarks about my overall point of view here. And and so getting into that was a little difficult. Can I just talk freely for a while?
Please do.
Okay. So first of all, I have always objected to the word technology. Technology is a highly misleading term, and if you watch my piece on YouTube called "The Myth of Technology," you'll see why. Because the term is used to cover a vast variety of stuff and make it all seem alike, and also to excuse a vast variety of crud, which is foisted upon us under the name of technology, like, quote, trust technology, or the notion that you can't criticize technology. Well, you can indeed criticize technology. But first of all, technology is anything we use that we're not born with, for God's sake. So technology is needles and thread. Technology is knives. Technology is frying pans and boats, rowboats. And the fact that we now have microcircuits doesn't change that in principle, except it changes the degree to which we are controlled by the technological thingies and environments people create. So I'd like to cite here a couple of things. We've all talked about the book Computerlib. I would like to mention that it is now available again. If you go to my homepage at hyperland.com, you'll find out how to order it. People are objecting to the high price, but hey, we had to price it so we could break even at least. Very expensive, very difficult to find a printer that would go from the original negative. My autobiography, Possiplex, tells the story that I don't have time to tell about all my ideas, where they came from, and how I've persisted with them over the years. Because you see, I do not consider myself a technologist at all. I consider myself, well, I have long considered myself a philosopher and filmmaker. When I got out of college, the person I thought of as a role model was the French filmmaker Jean Cocteau, who made Beauty and the Beast and also wrote philosophy and poetry. And I made, when I got out of college, I had made, though not finished, my first film, which you can watch on YouTube. It's called The Epiphany of Sloth and Furlough. It's slow moving, but I'm very proud of it. It tells a story. It has a likable hero, and it has a happy ending, and a philosophical ending at that. But by the time I was 19, I had my own magazine at college. It was called Nothing, and there's the first issue. And here's the second issue. And the third glorious issue. Really, was kite-shaped. And you had to, as you turned the pages, you had to rotate the magazine to keep reading it. And it was quite complex to put together. And I showed the mock-up to the printer, my friend Ned Powell, and he nodded, and so I thought I had essentially gotten his approval for it. And in fact, I did it all by myself because he was absolutely astounded when we put it together. And I was so pleased when I met the editor of The Nation, Victor Navaski, and he said, "Ted Nelson, not the Ted Nelson." And I waited. I didn't know if he was going to talk about hypertext or what. He said, "Not the Ted Nelson who published Nothing magazine." I was so excited. So basically, I was a project person. I caught fire in college as a project person, and doing projects of whatever kind was the heart of my being. That's what made me happiest. Although I was geared up for 2-week efforts, so 2-week projects were really the thing for me. Although I had no idea how long some of the others would take. So when I made the first film, though, suddenly I realized I was a perfectly, I won't use the word perfectly, I was a competent filmmaker, as you will see. I've got 2 story films on YouTube. And so that was what I've most enjoyed and wish I could do again. Then when I got into computers, to me, it was just another movie projector. See, a movie maker has to understand the technicalities of whatever he's dealing with. He has to understand cameras and lights and sound, you know, understand horses enough to tell the guys who wrangle them to go that way, and understand music enough to tell the orchestra what he wants, and so on. And so figuring out what the computer should do was, to me, just another technical aspect around creating something people would want. In this case, a new medium. And to me, it was the generalized medium we would actually want. You see, I'd long had a standing difficulty with, shall we say, techies. At Swarthmore College, there were engineers, and quite often we didn't get along. Some of them were my best friends. One of the engineering professors was a great friend of mine, and his family. But but I did note that a lot of them had, shall we say, rigid outlooks and shallow minds, and the notion of hierarchy built into them as the nature of the world. And the world is not hierarchical. I finally found the Greek philosopher who backs me up on this. The two popular, the two iconic Greek philosophers are, of course, Aristotle, who emphasized hierarchy, and Plato, who emphasized ideal types. But the man who talks about intertwingularity, that's Heraclitus. He was the guy who said you can't step in the same river twice. He was the one who saw the world as a booming, buzzing confusion of complicated, overlapping stuff. And that is my view of the world. And to represent this world of complicated, overlapping stuff, we need media that are able, in which you may create complicated, overlapping presentations of depth and richness and clarity. And that is what I've been that is what I've sought to do all these years. So the Xanadu concept is the notion of creating compositions of many parts, having arbitrary structure, not hierarchical necessarily, though hierarchy is permitted, and being able to create interactive structures around these systems. So generalizing documents to the max has been the objective. And the little demo we now have that shows text and a composite text built of many parts is only the beginning. So as soon as I took this computer course in graduate school, that was my viewpoint. And this did not come from any particular readings. I heard your earlier talk, and you said I was influenced by many people, and I don't think I was influenced by any of the people you mentioned. I noted them in passing, but my influences were more Shakespeare and Shakespeare with his Oceanic Mind, by the way. I love that description of him. I think it was South American guy who said he had an oceanic mind, meaning he surrounded and touched every topic and was able to comprehend every level of human life. And that to me, that's the kind of understanding we want to be able to communicate, a surrounding oceanic view of things. And so that, well, I hadn't heard that phrase. Shakespeare did influence me enormously as a child. And being able to understand all levels and also to see. My two greatest heroes when I was a boy were Frank Lloyd Wright and Leonardo da Vinci. And Wright, da Vinci was able to see what others looked at and did not see. And Frank Lloyd Wright was able to create things that others could not imagine. It created wonderful spaces to be in. And I confirmed this here in Marin County, California. If you go to the Civic Center, which you can get into free any morning or afternoon, unfortunately the cafeteria now closes at 3 because the cafeteria there is a marvelous space. My wife and I got married there 2 years ago, and by Douglas Engelbart. And this enormous space that Wright created was essentially unimaginable, and is practically unimaginable even after you've seen it. You can look down on a balcony at cars passing below, so there's an opening to the outside. It's an enormous building, but it's boomerang-shaped with atria, so you don't recognize the size of it, you're not oppressed by the size of it, and it feels comfortable. It's really marvelous. So that is the kind of, that was my inspiration for design, that there are magic combinations. And seeking the magic combination has always been the very center of my thinking. Okay, so what else did I want to tell you? I had an outline here somewhere. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, so basically, I'm a producer-director of software. Now, Douglas Engelbart was a producer-director of software. And Steve Jobs was a producer-director of software. Now, it's a very hard road to hoe. A lot of people try it. If you can't write code yourself, as I cannot, then it's very difficult. So my advice would be to anybody is to start coding now, because the 10,000 hours you're going to have to put in, at least that's the cliche, 10,000 hours is what it takes to master anything. You're going to have to put in somehow. Now, I don't think it's necessarily that long, but I sure took a long time learning to write. And although learning to make films, there was nothing to learn, I knew when I started, turned out. So, but the technicalities required the program on so many different levels, in so many different environments, with so many different protocols and error problems. This is not for beginners, and this is not for people over 40, really. You have to start young. So that's my one piece of advice.
Would you say everyone should learn to code as part of their education?
Certainly, not necessarily to be a programmer in the sense I've said, but some coding at least. I note that Estonia has started teaching coding in the 1st grade, and Finland is about to follow suit. That's Estonia and Finland, 2 of the most advanced countries in the world. They speak better English in Finland, by the way, than I ever hear here.
So with regard to the Oceanic Mind, which is very much the kind of concept space we're trying to encourage in our students, do you think that quality of mind can be taught, or can it simply be identified and encouraged? Or how do you feel about that?
I have no idea. I've certainly met many people who had difficulty seeing the big picture. And so that's what we're talking about, seeing big pictures. And what that means, of course, is also having a lot of contexts to refer to, because a big picture refers to many contexts simultaneously. And seeing the big picture geopolitically means knowing about different countries, knowing the ways of the world, of treachery, of agreements, of war, of negotiation. Seeing the big picture in architecture means knowing physics, knowing beauty, knowing elegance, knowing money and the politics of getting backing. So in all of these, to see the big picture and have an oceanic mind means learning as much as you can about as many different things as possible. And learning, taking courses is not necessarily the best way to learn. It's a good way to learn some things, but what can I say?
Well, in 1974, you write, instructional sequences aren't needed at all if the people are motivated and the materials are clear and available. And when I share that with my students, that often the response I get is, but of course students aren't motivated. There is no reward for motivation within the system, rather the opposite.
Ah, an extremely important point. An extremely important point. So the question is, what is your motivation? Is your motivation to get a degree and then a dumb job? Or is your motivation to be a learned person? I always wanted to know as much as possible. And if that's not your motivation, then you're one-legged as far as I know. Your mind has only one leg.
Are you one who believes that motivation and curiosity is that they are birthrights, but that the schooling system suppresses them? Or
that's certainly Bucky Fuller's position, which I've always accepted.
All right. Have you ever been tempted to devise a school of your own?
Oh, frequently, but I have enough projects to keep me going for the next 160 years, so getting into that is not accessible, even though it's much easier now with so-called charter schools. But there you still have to jump through a lot of hoops.
So I look at Open Xanadu and I think...
It's easier to start a university.
Yes, in many ways you're correct.
And then you could admit teenagers to your university. So why have a school?
So when you think about Open Xanadu not as a demonstration of intertwingularity, is it also a place to learn?
Well, what it is right now is a single demo. We're trying to get it working so we can show so that anybody can publish their own Xanadocs, and that'll take a while, because since it works in the browser, that means that because of browser restrictions, it can't send for the arbitrary pages necessary to assemble the different parts. So that means that the arbitrary pages have to be sent for by a server. That means we have to set it up. We're setting it up with Google AppSpot, and that means we have to set up an LLC, and we've got those delays. Ho-ho.
But the aim is going to be not just to link documents that are already written, but perhaps to get people to write documents knowing they can be Xanadocs. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll have it. We have a clumsy editor for that, because since I have very few people and I only work with volunteers, because that way we never go over budget. There's not it won't be soon, but we'll have an editor this year, but it won't be a great one. But that will just be for text. You have to go one stupid step at a time.
If you were going to provide some advice and direction to students who are doing research on your work, in addition to the materials you've shared with us, are there other sources or directions you would suggest?
Well, start with Posiplex and watch my videos, especially Computers for Cynics and The Epiphany of Sloth and Furlough and Silicon Valley Story, and that'll give you the picture. I haven't talked about my philosophical work at all, but I've got hundreds of thousands of notes. You see, the reason I got into computers is partly that I just wanted a way of taking notes that would be satisfactory, and using file cards, which I was doing, was extremely clumsy. And I wanted to be able to use the same file card in many places, and that's what led to the transclusion concept. And from there, it became the Xanadu concept. But in the meantime, philosophical work is divided into 4 parts now. Schematics, which is the study of structure and representation and abstraction. Normatics, a word I did not coin. I thought I'd coined it, but then I found out it had existed long before, meaning exactly what I intended, which is the philosophy of shoulds, ranging from moral philosophy to rules and laws and their enforcement. Gamex, which is my term for the structure of situations and maneuvers within situations, which, by the way, is what Fox's normatics, you see, because in arbitrary moral philosophy, you say, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody did this or that, or here's the justification for moral behavior, but what happens when you make rules? And then when you make rules and try to enforce them, well, that becomes gaming, because now enforcement leads to evasion, and evasion leads to more enforcement, and that leads to sophisticated normatics, which is entirely different from naive normatics. Anyway, so Gamex is the structure of and representation and the manipulation of situations. And finally, the part that bears on thought vectors in concept space, what I call Idemix, which is the representation of the tokens that we present our ideas with and argue with and manipulate as we redesign ideas. And my examples are designing a sitcom, theology, and software design. Yeah. So that in all of these, we're manipulating ideas and assimilating ideas to them, or idemes. So an ideme is a unit, is a token of thought, which is likely to be changing, which frequently changes its meaning every minute as you are redesigning or rethinking it. So those are the branches of my philosophy as presently constituted, and nowhere have I succeeded in getting a decent write-up of this.
So
but I put a lot of work into it over the last 50 years.
So if we were to try to find those, they're not easily found?
Nope, just what I just said.
So
I did some write-ups for my class at UC Santa Cruz last year, but they're nowhere near publishing.
I see. You've constantly been led in the direction of self-publication, which as you know, in the academic world has a bad reputation. Yet you have been not only successful but extraordinarily influential with your self-publication. So this is part of.
Let us not forget that T.E. Lawrence of Arabia was a self-publisher, that Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a self-publisher, that a great variety of great persons have been self-publishers. It's only Publishers Row, the commercial publishers have tried to give self-publishing a bad name, and of course academia. Well, I think there's been a lot of self-publishing in academia that has influence, but I'm not. I don't have any documentation on it. But if it's good enough for T.E. Lawrence and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, it's good enough for me. Getting it out there, getting it publicized and sold, that's another matter. I mean, very few people have bought my autobiography, even though it got 5 stars on Amazon. What can I say?
So there's
some 50,000 people bought Computerlib, but I was cheated by my distributors and didn't see the money. If I had, I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in now.
When students are in search of things that are outside of the mainstream, when they're trying to find things that have not been so carefully vetted, or one might even say desiccated by some of the conventional structures, how do you advise them to develop the discernment to be able to tell a Computerlib dream machines from something that's perhaps going to not be worth their investigation?
It's very hard. It's very hard. I have a friend in Sausalito, a very intelligent man, who lectures me frequently on the current destruction of the earth. Well, one day he said to me, "I've just found out about the Protocols of Zion, this terrible document." And I had to inform him that the Protocols of Zion, which claims that the Jews do terrible things, the Protocols of Zion was a French fiction humor, I believe around 1816, which was then repurposed by the Tsar of Russia and his agents in order to back up the pogroms against the Jews. But the fact that an intelligent person found it compelling was very disturbing to me, because it shows how hard it is to tell the important yet unpopular view from the crackpot or vicious.
Which returns to the basic qualities of character that you philosophize about, we all are concerned with: wisdom, discernment, the ability to find motivation within oneself, the persistence to stick with things that may be unpopular while being open enough to accept correction. Is character something that can be part of an education without simply being indoctrination?
Well, when people say character, don't they mean honesty and uprightness and decency? I don't know. I don't know. I have known one or two psychopaths, and I don't know whether education corrected that. But, I mean, most people are decent, and if they weren't, we'd be in a hell of a we'd be in an even worse mess than we are. But I don't know. To me, the Oceanic Mind notion of having many contexts and having seen many levels of human life, as well as understanding aspects of science, this is the hard part. So having a multi-contextual background. If I were the place to start would really be nursery school. To me, it's very sad what they do on Sesame Street. Teaching children the concepts of up and down and inside and outside is such a preposterous waste of time, when they ought to be getting serious vocabulary, serious multi-contextual stuff. I mean, every kid knows what's inside and outside and up and down, for Christ's sake. But they manage to get hundreds of thousands of dollars because the puppets are so charming. And the point is that we need to teach a child another language when the child is 3 or 4. Takes merely hiring a nanny from another country. It's very cheap. Trying to learn that language at the age of 10 is incredibly difficult. So why aren't we doing that? Why? And I just read one of the most depressing things, which was a study of vocabulary, which stated that actually it was the mere avalanche of words, that by the age of 3, a child from a well-to-do home had heard 3 million words, I think it was. Different, I mean, obviously not unique words. Whereas a child from an impoverished home had heard 150,000 words out of total. And the vocabulary correspondingly sparse. And sending kids out to Head Start doesn't fix that. So it's we fought the Civil War to liberate the slaves, and yet their descendants have remained in an impoverished situation, and this is appalling. And also I'm not saying this is racial. I'm saying for everybody who's impoverished, and we don't know how to fix that. And the school system can't do it. And what can I say? So you're off to a bad start with almost everybody, and trying to create a vocabulary-rich environment that is motivating, instead of giving kids cell phones to gossip about each other. I don't know the situation. I don't know the answer.
Well, we have in this course tried to create an environment that would be as rich as we could make it, be a place that's not only an interface but a learning environment. As Alan Kay said, every interface should be a learning environment. The internet has always seemed to me to be one of the most extraordinary platforms for multi-contextuality, but certainly not used habitually in that way.
Well, I'm on Wikipedia half an hour a day. I try to avoid the videos because that's a swamp. You start on one and you can't get out, like chocolates. And there's wonderful stuff there, but pawing your way through the enticing and time wasting is very difficult.
Well, now you've mentioned Wikipedia. How does something like that seem to you?
Something like that. Well, there's only one thing like that. How does Wikipedia seem to me? It's terrific. Studies have shown that it's about equivalent to the Encyclopedia Britannica in accuracy. Now, But by the way, it's a complete myth that anybody can edit it. There are boards of editors behind every article, especially every controversial article, and so that is it's a benign myth that anyone can edit it. You propose an edit, and then they will look it over. But it's very difficult to do that. For example, I wasn't able to correct on Wikipedia the date of my birth for about 5 years, till eventually they got it right. So, but when going through science stuff, although it's very difficult to read, it's extraordinarily rich. The history is fascinating.
And we are looking at a platform that was originally designed to be peer-reviewed by academics, failed in that respect, thrown open to the world, and became a brilliant success. I don't want to be naive or Rousseauistic to a dangerous degree, but is that instructive?
It's a one-time, I think it's a one-time item, because the fact that a culture coalesced around it in a unique fashion does not assure that such a thing would happen again anywhere. Now, if there were a Xanopedia, see, one of the things wrong with Wikipedia is that and in fact, the founder has made this complaint, the articles have a length proportional to what the editors consider the subject's importance. That's silly. Why can't the articles be any length? But in order to have that, you'd have to have parallel pages visibly connected, which they don't have yet. I say yet. I don't know if they ever will, but it would be my hope.
There's an interesting mention of Wikipedia in a book by Michael Nielsen called Reinventing Discovery, The Rise of Networked Science. And he observes that Wikipedia is not an encyclopedia, it's a city whose principal export to the world is encyclopedias. And that gets to your point that at the heart of this is culture.
Well, but I would say it is the internal culture of Wikipedia. It's not something from the outside culture exactly.
And you would say that a computing culture makes it possible, but by no means inevitable, that something like that could succeed.
When you say a computing culture, I don't know what that means, because that varies from the digital rabble of Facebook to the high culture of various educational sites. So there are many, many digital cultures.
And one of them in danger of disappearing would be what you would call the dream machines.
Meaning what?
Universal machines that could help us realize, prototype, and enact what our highest hopes for the species might be.
Well, I think certainly the people who are doing, who are putting out Raspberry Pi are trying to do that, but then they see it as a general machine, and I'm trying to do it in trying to create a general medium for grand compositions, but at the same time, ideally that would also include simulations, but I can't open it to that right now.
So in the end, the connections that you imagine are perhaps equally so orchestrations, sounding that grand harmony?
Eh? No. I love what you just said, but I didn't understand it.
You know, the idea of the music of the spheres, that something about the absolute proportions of planets and their orbits actually also emits musical sounds that would eventually, if we could only hear it, give us some deeper insight into the structure of the universe. I am bold to ask, you are a dreamer. Does Open Xanadu try to tap into something at that scale?
Well, I will generalize the question and say, perhaps you mean am I striving for a generality and elegance and breadth that has that aesthetic And the answer is certainly yes. I do consider myself an artist. I do, in the memory of Frank Lloyd Wright, I have the same notion of a grand structure that has unity, and trying to bring together the parts, trying to create a working field on which fabulous media can be presented is unfortunate, has unfortunately gripped me all these years.
You are in many respects the Orson Welles of computing.
For good and for evil, yes. Because he shot himself in the foot in a number of ways, just as I have. And his career peaked early, just as mine has. I don't know if your students know about Orson. Orson Welles, at the age of 16, was mistaken for a professional actor, so that at the age of 15, he was mistaken for a professional actor, so that his high school did not get the acting award. At the age of 16, he was already at the Gate Theatre in Dublin, and a very honorable theater. At the age of 18, he was on Broadway. At the age of 22, he had I think 2 or 3 shows running on Broadway besides his own theater in Harlem, and a radio show wherein he presented a show that terrified many people. We don't know how many people actually were afraid. That number may have been exaggerated, but he made a number of people think that the United States was being invaded by Martians. Once again, this comes back to how do you judge an important radical document from a fraud. And he timed it so that a number of people would turn the dial after the beginning of his show and miss the fact that it was a dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. So, at any rate, by the time the show ended, and it was Halloween night, I believe 1937, by the time the show ended, the cops were in the lobby of, I think it was CBS, and they took him into custody, and he apologized and said he never imagined such a thing would happen. Although, if you examine his contract with the network, it seems that they absolved him from any liability from any damage which might result from any of his broadcasts. That had been prearranged long before Halloween. And on the strength of this radio broadcast, he got a contract in Hollywood, the likes of which has never been seen before or since, where he got the right to do anything he wanted. And what he did was he made the film Citizen Kane. Did he go to film school? No. One bright lady at the studio created a crib sheet, a study book on movie technique. And he went from there to invent a great deal of motion picture technique on his own in this first movie. And the movie was Citizen Kane. And there he shot himself in the foot because he essentially attacked one of the most powerful men in America, William Randolph Hearst. And to add insult to injury, something many people don't know, the word rosebud, which the great mystery of the movie was what rosebud meant. And it turned out at the very end that it was the name of the sled that had been taken away from him, or with which he tried to hold, with which the protagonist had tried to hold back the lawyer that was taking him away from his parents, or foster parents. But in fact, Rosebud, according to my readings, was the William Randolph Hearst's pet name for the genitalia of his beloved.
Yes, I've heard that story too.
So that he was, by this rhetorical device, by this means, he really shot himself in the foot and earned Hearst's absolute enmity to the day he died, which was no doubt a part of his downfall. So basically, he went down from there, made a number of films which did not get proper release. What is some people recall as greatest film, The Magnificent Ampersands. The Magnificent Ampersand was recut in his absence, which had been arranged by Jock Whitney and Nelson Rockefeller in his absence in South America, and it was released as a second feature next to Mexican Spitfire, Here's a Ghost with Lupe Vélez, guaranteeing that no one would see it. And so from there on, he made films on his own from time to time. I do feel another kinship with Orson in that when he made the movie Macbeth, 5 different women played Desdemona, and you wouldn't know it from watching. And it so happened that in my film, The Epiphany of Slocum Furlough, I had to do retakes several years later with another girl, and no one noticed that it was another girl. So there you go. Anyway, so yeah, my sense of kinship with Orson is great. The fact I've been carrying projects on my back at my own expense for decades is another similarity. The fact that I've out-yeared him and I'm still standing is my only hope.
And he worked for a long time on a project having to do with Don Quixote.
Yeah.
So there seems to be another point of connection, perhaps, that the quixotic adventure, the quixotic quest, is the one worth embarking on.
I resent that deeply. Quixote was deluded and mistook the windmills for giants. I have not been deluded. I have been clear-minded from day one, and my designs are valid. It's only that getting them done is very difficult, particularly in the atmosphere of ridicule and misunderstanding I've had to deal with. So I do not like the comparison to Don Quixote one little bit.
Well, my apologies. I meant no harm by that.
I'm just saying. I'm enjoying the conversation nonetheless.
He is in his...
to be clear about it.
Yes. Well, the role of the imagination is one that has engaged the minds of artists. It's now engaging neuroscientists. It seems to be the way in which innovations can emerge. We have some capacity for thinking outside the bounds of the thoughts we've already had. Would you say that the imagination is one of the things that's driven you most completely through your life?
Well, of course. But I would also add, I believe, a certain clarity of imagination. And that is because what I learned in college was seeing through seeing an initial idea through to the final detailing. When I didn't mention that I wrote the first rock musical. I forgot that one. And I said, I want to write a rock musical, or a rock and roll musical, I guess. And there was none at the time. It was 1957. And I thought first, I had a lot of ideas. One was that I'd print a huge poster on butcher paper. Well, that turned out not to be able to print on butcher paper. But here was the poster for it. And it ran as scheduled for 2 nights in 1957. It is not considered an official part of rock history, but there you go. And so following through that initial idea and changing it constantly, but always adapting the idea to the mechanisms available. The same was for my movie, The Epiphany of Slocum Furlough. I started with 2 ideas. I thought, okay, I'll have a movie where the guy eventually is looking for the meaning of life, and finally a voice tells him the meaning of life. And then I said, uh-oh, I don't have time to write a script. Uh-oh. And by the way, that was when sound on film was extremely difficult to do, because you had to work with 2 different systems, the sonic system and the parallel picture. So I said, okay, I'll just have the actors say parp, parp, and then I'll fit it on later, and it'll look like a badly synchronized foreign film. And it'll look funny. Well, it turned out that even for people who'd watched foreign films, this was a little too much to take. But aside from that, I just started with that idea, and the guy I wanted to be in the leading role, and I made it up as I went along. So all of the detailing of a project that has to follow from the initial idea and driving that project forward toward a culmination. truly achieves that initial idea. That was my project experience in college. And that led me to the Xanadu notion, because I have driven forward through thick and thin with many implementations and very good ideas and many wonderful collaborators, although some of them took different turns when we got backing from Autodesk, and unfortunately Roger Gregory was unseated, and that was partly my fault. Then the project went in a different direction, which I don't like, but eventually that failed, and I got it back, and have been continuing to move it forward, having to move it from the excellent design of 1979, which may still come to life. Roger Gregory is still working on that, to the present version, which uses conventional files, which is a dumb down, and at the same time allows us to work within the browser and other structures. So this is the same process, this is the same project life, which is pursuing what remains an evolving vision in the imagination and fulfilling it as best you can, which is the problem we face in every project. And I think in following the Xanadu ideal, I have done a rather good job in fulfilling it honorably, though at great cost.
So a trail of wonder rigorously explored.
You could say, or trail of wonder, yeah. Paths of glory, paths with wonderment at every turn, and curtailed. The paths keep diverging, and I try them one by one and step back. Two paths diverged in a wood, and I took that one and 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 that one, and managed to stay on the right one.
What would you advise students to cultivate that stubborn independence of mind in themselves?
The simple question of what you want. I didn't want to just be famous. I wanted to be great. And that's very different from being famous. To be great, you have to do something good and important. So that's a whole different ballgame. If you have a simpler ideal, like being rich, or having a nice home and happy children, then you follow a different path. So the point is to keep in mind what it is you want, and always hang on to that visualization. But there are so many stories in the big city, and so many ways to go wrong, that hanging on to that, and above all, looking back, not doing things you regret. I've hurt people and regretted terribly, and so not acting in temper, and not acting without finding out all aspects of the situation, and as I did when I saw to the demotion of Roger Gregory in 1988, if I hadn't done that, I believe we would have had Xanadu instead of the World Wide Web. My picture of the World Wide Web, you see, is that it's based on a mistake I made in 1988, not on the originality of Mr. Berners-Lee. Great guy, but the World Wide Web was not original. It was the fourth hypertext system on the internet. But as I've said, Tim Berners-Lee is a wonderful figurehead. I compare him to Ronald Reagan, with a very clear and, shall we say, easily expressed ideal. Anyway, so I would say to anyone who wants, the earlier you decide what you want in life, and the clearer you can be, and the more flexible in getting to it, the better. It helps to marry well and early, but very few succeed at that. Marrying early is usually a very bad idea. Although I have one friend who dropped out of Swarthmore College, and I created a pathetic figure in my rock musical based on him. Well, he married a wonderful gal and became a professor and had a marvelous career as a university professor. So that goes to show that mistakes can be rectified, especially if you luck out.
Doug Engelbart described his visions as epiphanies or flashes. Would you say that your vision came to you with an all-at-onceness like that?
I don't remember. I don't remember. It would be good. What? Oh, yeah, well, right. If there was a moment of epiphany, it was seeing that you could put screens on a computer. I said, hey, screens, I can do that. I'm a movie maker. So now what will it take to make the kinds of movies we will need for education and literacy and scholarship and an intellectual future? Because I wanted people to be more intellectual. Of course, they've gotten less intellectual. So that's something I would still like to correct. But unfortunately, there's not very much reward for knowing things these days, for being a general intellectual, from having an oceanic mind. So changing the reward structure would be a very good part of it. But yes, I think the epiphany was seeing the computer screen, but I don't remember a moment. I don't remember like the moment where Bertrand Russell threw up a tobacco tin and said, "My God, the ontological proof of God is valid." You dropped that one. But there was an epiphany I had when I was crossing Cambridge Common in 1961 and suddenly realized that you could have photorealistic movie animation, which I spent a very great deal of time on in the 1960s, and I've now published my patent application on that. It's called The Scene Machine. I applied for a patent on it in 1971, but by that time it was too late, and I wouldn't have had the money to follow it through anyway. So it remains simply as an interesting object for historians of computer graphics.
One of the things that is abundantly clear in your work is how quotable you are. Would you say that at some level, language, facility with words, fluency with reading is still at the bedrock of human imaginative growth?
Well, certainly. But facility with words comes not just from reading, but from practicing, and writing and rewriting. Now, I would say I'm honored. I think Alan Kay is at least as quotable as I am, but at any rate, and he's a wonderful writer. And there are many quotable fine writers in the computer field, especially, to the best of my knowledge, among the pioneers. But of course, the computer field is so huge now. How would I know? So the question is how we can enhance people's vocabularies again and get them writing again. I would like to see a Sesame Street with a big vocabulary for big vocabulary building. I don't mean like saying, oh, sesquipedalian means a long word, kiddies. No. I mean the fluent use of long words without bothering to define them, but with allowing inferential meaning of them, which is one of the ways we learn, for God's sake, to become a part of the environment. But having motivated TV shows where where kids would follow the story, even though they didn't know all the words and would want to learn and understand all those words, that would be something. But I just see vocabulary. I mean, my attitude is very much that of Gore Vidal. I see a declining culture in this country, and increasingly radio and television are filled with, and the roads are filled with aggression and shouting, and civilized discourse is on the wane, except on PBS, which is rather intolerable because its shows are so boring for the most part, and the good ones are punctuated with those tedious non-commercials where they ask for money, so-called non-commercial. Yeah, I don't know what to do.
Well, one thing that is also clear from your work is that not only is there a spirit of learning, but a spirit of playfulness. How would you put playfulness within the human capacity for growth and progress?
Well, it's a good thing, and you have to have an environment where people are open to it. So writing playfully, or winking and nudging the reader, this is part of it, and throwing in jokes, which of course would not pass muster in an academic setting. Yeah, sure, playfulness is good.
Well, we are encouraging a spirit of playfulness in our course, and in fact, the concept experience I've assigned the students in my section this week is to make their blogs as playful and fantic as possible. When you say by fantics, I mean the art and science of getting ideas across both emotionally and cognitively. This, again, far ahead of its time. Educators are now beginning to realize that emotion is not antithetical to reason, but that in fact part of the wholeness of human experience, neglected at our cognitive peril.
To quote David Hume, the reason is, wasn't it Hume? The reason is, and by rights should be, governed by the emotions.
How does that become something other than anarchic or chaotic?
Civilization is based upon the assumption that if we band together, we will be better off. So that banding together, even though our emotions point us in different directions and make us want to throttle the other guy, this is the important thing. So there is a point at which it all does break apart. But remember, anarchy is not necessarily what people think. I believe that didn't Catalonia elect an anarchist government in 1936 or 7? So it's not necessarily a war of all against all, but rather a ground of disputation within the general agreement of civilized society.
I can't think of a better last word.
We have to stop now?
Well, no, I'm happy to go as long as you want. I just, you know, it's not good interviewing form, but there are moments in which I simply just want to fall silent and think about this for a moment. Dead air for the viewer, but I guess the peril that all of us in academia face, or maybe I'm just projecting, is the great peril of becoming glib with matters of great moment. And I don't ever want to be glib about any of this. But as one becomes more fluent, the risk of becoming glib, it seems to me, increases.
I don't see what's wrong with being glib, meaning being able to say something briefly?
No, being able to say something with a kind of superficial profundity that upon further examination is just a clever thing to have said.
Well, I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. Clever things which turn out to be wrong are one thing, but clever things which have a good ring to them are good. I do think that Marx's comment, "Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains," has a ring to it that is not glib. It makes you think. And there are many comments which may be brief. I was trying to think of one by Thomas Paine, but I don't get one at the moment. No, there's no reason that one-liners can't be profound. It's just that they're harder to find.
It's true. I wanted to ask you a question about your talk, your eulogy at the Doug Engelbart Memorial. It was extraordinary. It was, as you know, quoted and republished by John Markoff in the New York Times. But I heard laughter in the room as you were giving it. Do you have any sense of why something that seemed to me to be laughter was the last thing that occurred to me, but why did that happen in the room at that moment?
I don't know. A number of people ask me. I suspect it might have been from people who were fans of mine, expecting me to be funny, and thinking I was. but I have no idea. It didn't bother me. I mean, what I said was the main thing. Yeah, I felt that I had to say what nobody else did. That here was a gathering of people who had more or less turned their backs on Doug Engelbart, now coming to praise him. And this, while not exactly hypocritical, because it can represent rethinking, nevertheless, it's an irony that that deserves attention, and also a reproach, which I felt was in order. And so that was the thrust of what I was saying. And generally, I'm the person who has to say the things no one else wants to say, because they're more concerned to stay on good terms with the people than tell the truth.
And you found Shakespeare, again, with that Oceanic Mind, had imagined an analogous situation which fit where you wanted
Precisely.
to express yourself.
Yeah, I didn't go looking in Shakespeare. I happen to know that speech from high school.
Well, it was marvelously appropriate, and Renaissance studies is one of the things that I've worked on as a scholar. John Milton, perhaps too hierarchical for you, but has been someone I've worked with, and he's often pitted against Shakespeare, but I think that's a mistake. I think that the capacious imagination makes kindred of us all.
No.
And with Shakespeare, I think of The Tempest, and maybe this is a good, since I don't know, would you call yourself a Prospero? Would you say?
I wouldn't. I don't know The Tempest enough to say. I saw we walked out of the movie.
Oh, well, I haven't seen the movie, so I can't say on that one either. But he's often been thought of as a figure for the author himself. That he comes to a kind of peace with both the harmony and the discord that his own art has enabled. As you think about the work you have done, but also the work you continue to do, still motivated by urgency,
Yeah.
but do you also find a sense of can you feel that this has amounted to something?
No, I feel I've wasted most of the last 50 years. Because I've been unable to get anything done. They could have been doing good stuff, but instead I chose a path that I believe for something I believe the human race desperately needs, and yet nobody gets it. That's what infuriates me.
Well, I can tell you that the students' response to your work indicates that, at least along the thought vector of what's the best way to equip our minds for the work ahead, find your work very resonant. In fact, they come to it with a sense of excitement and discovery, especially that it's being assigned to be read in a college course. This seems to break many of their expectations. So in that sense, though it may not be at the height of what you continue to dream of, it's been pretty satisfying to me to see students' minds awakened by your vision.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. So why don't you assign a couple of chapters in Posiplex and the videos? I think that'll bring them up to date.
We will follow up with that, certainly. Anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to make sure that you've addressed before we break off the conversation?
Well, let me think. No, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I always thought of myself as a generalist and primarily a filmmaker at heart, but then that embraces a great deal because filmmakers make documentaries too. But I will say I don't advise this sort of a course. I'll say this about academia. I wish I had known before I started that academia is a rough road. That you have two choices. There's the professor choice, the tenure choice, which is very, very hard work, and then there's the adjunct possibility, which is very, very hard work for little money and little prospect, and so that academia holds out a golden promise that I wish I had understood better and had not reached for. However, to try to be a generalist is a very expensive and unrewarding role unless you want it for its own sake. And I wanted it for its own sake, and so I don't know, that sets me apart. But if there's anybody out there who wants to really cultivate an oceanic mind, good luck. And it's a lot of work, and not everyone will appreciate it. Oh, my wife just slipped me a piece of paper. One more point to mention. That software is a branch of filmmaking. That's what I've always said. It's because in a movie, you start with an initial idea of what you want on the screen, and then you attempt to realize it through many different techniques. And a movie is a series of presentations on a screen that affect the heart and mind of the viewer. So what is software but a series of presentations on the screen, interactive presentations on the screen, that affect the heart and mind of the viewer and interact and have consequences? So you can either say it's something else, or you can say it's an enhanced movie with other possibilities. But the point is that I think that to learn interactive software, you should study your Disney and your Orson Welles and your Frank Capra and your Eisenstein as the fundamental work, and the technicalities of programming should be then learned as a part of making it come about. But realizing that it's the presentation and the unification of that presentation, that's the thing to stick with. Frank Lloyd Wright, his stuff was extremely unified. I was amused to learn that aside from the Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York, which is an internal spiral, he had a house in Los Angeles that had an external spiral staircase. I think it was threatened recently. I don't know if it still exists. But that's unification, taking a couple of ideas and making them into a special space. So a filmic space, or a presentational space, or the fantic space of software. I think that's probably the place to start.
May I simply say thank you for your time, for your work, for your ongoing interest, and though it does get hard to hold on to a vision of human capability, I suspect you're still a dreamer, Ted Nelson. I suspect.
Well, thank you. I think you are too. And thank you for the eloquence of your interview.
It's my pleasure. I hope our paths will cross again.
I'm sure they will. Thanks a lot.